We are now in the breakout session, bridging the policy to practice, gender-transformative TVET to increase women workforce participation. We've had a lovely examples from the previous panel, from Nepal about India and of course USAID's experience. Now we have two additional members to the panel, and if my colleague Anil will allow me to, Maria Brindlemeyer is the Senior Knowledge Management Specialist at Making Sense International. We have Martha Muwezi, Executive Director of FAWI Africa, and again Anil Paudel, the 2019, is it the Echidna Global Scholar and CEO for Rights for Children. We'll just begin with recapping some of the key points from the policy panel before and trying to connect that. So instead of me sort of struggling through, Anil, you had this wonderful acronym ACT. If you can just tell the audience what that means and maybe one or two of the other policy prescriptions that come out of your research.
Oh, sure. Thank you. So ACT, actually it's a framework that I developed by Plan International Belgium. So I adopted their approach framework. So ACT, because I'm talking about vocational training programs, technical education, and in this kind of education, especially in TVET, so ACT becomes a very important component. When I say ACT, it's again A stands for access to TVET, technical and vocational education and training programs. C stands for completion. We need to enable girls not only to participate, but also to complete these programs. And finally, T, which is very important, transition from school to industry, like transition to workforce. Of course, the program itself has to facilitate girls, those who complete technical programs, for their transition into a labor force. That's what I mean when I say ACT.
Great. We ended the last panel without getting into sort of other areas I think are also quite important as well too. We talked about family responsibilities on the fringes. We talked about the sort of cultural angle on this as well too. What happens when there's no jobs for trained individuals, particularly young women. Looking at learnability, this lifelong learning, the ability to learn how to learn, because the job market is constantly changing no matter where you are in the world. And also about data collection. Obviously, a lot of us here know that better data provides opportunities for better policies. At least that's what we believe. At this time, I'd like to go to Maria. Maria, can you tell us a little bit about what your organization is doing to increase women's workforce, workforce participation, and then really bridging that gap? We've heard the policies. What are you doing on the ground?
Thank you. We are primarily active in kind of three areas. One is labor market assessments, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Another one is as part of the Youth Power Learning activities, which is a USAID-funded project. We've been working very much with implementers of TVET programs, especially in Central America and also in Africa. And then we've also been giving grants. Liana Mar mentioned this morning the Young Women's Empowerment Prize, and so we were the ones that were awarding that prize, and it has been given to many, so we have it to 7 grantees, so I can talk a little bit about that. From a labor market assessment perspective, the way that we are looking at gender is that we really want to incorporate the gender aspects already in the labor market assessments, in the needs assessment, because if it's not in there, then the programs just are not going to implement it later. And so we're not looking just at skills, but we're primarily also looking at the behaviors and the perceptions. I think we talked already a lot this morning about that girls sometimes select out of certain jobs just because they don't think it's a girl's job, or somebody else thinks it's not a girl's job. And similarly, the employers' perceptions where they would just not consider girls. So we are looking at all of those barriers, not just the skills barriers. And then when we are looking at the TVET projects with Youth Power Learning, I can give a few more examples later on, but they have been incorporating a lot of the gender aspects in their implementation in Central America and in Africa. And so that, I think, has been really proven some interesting, or provided some interesting examples. And I think the grants, which I think are a great example of the NGO kind of examples. So they're not big scalable or scaled yet examples, but I think they provide excellent examples of how young women and training for young women can really make a difference. And some of them are actually working with schools and making sure that women get the right training, technical training, soft skills training.
Can I just ask you to give us an example? I guess my mic is out now. My apologies. We've heard about Nepal. We've heard about the Philippines. How does that change culturally in Latin America? Maybe just one or two ideas about how it's differentiated.
Quite a bit, I would say, because a lot of the drivers in Latin America, or at least in Central America, which is where these programs were, have been the gangs. And so a lot of the way in which the programs were set up has been by the gang environment. So for example, when I think the program was rolled out in the most gang affected districts, and what that meant is that they had planned certain training places where the youth would be trained, but then as they were looking more at the gang areas, the youth wouldn't be able to travel from one place to another if they had to cross another gang area. So certain things are just very different or very specific to the local environment, and that's just one example.
Excellent. Martha, in this morning's opening panel, you spoke about how you felt that girls' education needs to act more quickly to achieve gender equality. I mean, I think we all feel that things are moving too slowly. I think the ILO shows that with the current sort of change, it's probably going to take a couple of 100 years for things to really change. How is your organization changing this in the field? What are the specific applications that you're using to kind of facilitate a greater gender equality?
Yeah, thank you. There are quite a number of things that FAWE is doing. And one of the issues that we looked at first was to change the narrative. I think it has been mentioned from the earlier panel discussions that in most of the countries, if not all, TVET has been looked at as a cause, for lack of a better word, of the failure. It's those that don't qualify to go to university for a degree course that go for TVET. And that has been one of the biggest challenges, the attitude, the perception. And what we have done as FAWE is changing that narrative. And how we have done this is we have demonstrated by getting very intelligent girls, putting them in TVET. Many of them have qualified as plumbers, as electrical persons, as masons. And that alone, these now become like role models. When the people see what they are doing, it has changed. It may not be 100%, but to a high degree, it has changed the perception, particularly among parents. Because you will compare them to those that have done a degree and actually don't have a job, and those that have done TVET and have made progress, both in their own lives and even those around them. So that's one of the activities that we have engaged in. And this, we don't do it alone as FAWE, but we do it with ministries of education, particularly because the ministries have a bigger role to play in terms of making TVET institutions a conducive environment for the learners. And we also know that there are so many out-of-school youths, the young people. and many of them are out of school for a number of reasons. Some of them, it's in terms of financial resources. Others, it's for, like, in the conflict areas. So for those that are out of school for financial reasons, they are not able to continue with the university degree because it's very expensive. But what we have done is to provide them with scholarships to be able to go to TVET institutions. And I want to say there are some of the students also that we have worked with who in one way or another, because they have seen somebody that has gone to TVET and has qualified and is working well, many of them have also opted not to go to university, but to go to TVET institutions. So there is all that mix. And the other one is working with the Ministry of Education in terms of trying to improve. I know it was mentioned earlier in terms of quality. There is more of theory as compared to the practical. And one of the things that we have worked with the governments and also with the institutions is how do they provide quality education, linking the institutions plus the industries. What is the labor demand? What is required outside there? And how do the industries work with the institutions in terms of letting them know what the demand is out there? Because again, one of the shortcomings is when you girls are going into TVET, but traditionally, there are those courses that are meant to be for the girls. You will find that most of the girls will go into tailoring, they'll go into catering, they'll go into salon work. And at the end of it, when you compare the two in terms of where is the benefit, you find still that the boys are ahead of the girls because of the courses that they are taking. And that is also another angle that we have tried as FAO to break that link, to motivate the girls, again using the role models approach, to make sure that the girls get into those traditional male-dominated fields. And this has been because of, it's not that they can't do it, but it's the perception, it is the attitude. Nobody's motivating them that you can do it. So the few women out there that have succeeded through TVET are the ones that now come back, and they're able to encourage the girls, they're able to motivate them, and we've seen quite, commendable success in that particular area. And the other one is about working with the ministries to investing in TVET. And as they're investing, we're not only looking at infrastructure, we're also looking at the human resource. Who are the tutors out there in those colleges? How gender sensitive are they? Knowing that this is an area where the girls are just coming in. They're just trying to get in. So how does the system, the education system around them, make the environment conducive for the girls to join, to complete, and be able to perform well within their courses? So those are some, just to mention a few, those are some of the interventions that we are doing with supporting governments to make sure that TVET is recognized as a good thing, and at the same time that there is space for the girls and women to get in there. Thank you.
Martha, thank you very much. I love the idea of changing the narrative. I think that's so important. You've raised a couple of issues here about role models. You've spoken about what we call NEETs, neither in employment, education, or training. Basically young people who have dropped out of the labor market. We count 74 million young people in that. I mean, when a young person drops out, what is their future like, and that for their family? And another issue which you've alluded to, which I've heard before in other forums, is about women's, it's their confidence, not their competence. And maybe we can talk a little bit about that in a moment. Anil, your research, your presentation before, you talked about gender-transformative policies. I'd like to find out a little bit more about what that actually means here, and also what are you doing in your programs to encourage young women into sort of male-dominated industries as well, if you would, please, sir.
Thank you. I think it's a very important question. So yes, gender transformative education, gender transformative TVET, that's what we are talking about a lot from this morning. So for me, gender transformative, to make it gender transformative is to ensure through policy measures and through practice that both girls and boys have equal opportunities in education, in careers. So how can we achieve that? It's like a lot of things it encompasses, like creating a welcoming environment, especially for girls, improving infrastructures and facilities, so that we make the institutions and the environment girl-friendly. So the environment attracts them. And also it's a lot about breaking the gender norms, the gender stereotypes, the self-selection thing that we talk about. So unless and until we are able to break, girl will self-select, because they will continue pursuing the field of careers, the field of study that they are used to. Like I gave an example of nursing, caregiving, tailoring, beauty and cosmetology. But why can't we have girls in engineering, in IT, in science and technology, in other streams such as agriculture? So this is the very important question, and we all have to have different roles to play. Of course, the government is the primary role player, a primary actor, but there's also a role of civil society organization, NGOs like ours, and not only that. I think there's a greater role of media community in informing, educating, and like in helping to change the attitude and the mindset. Otherwise, it cannot happen. And then we need to, this is very important and urgent. We need to act and intervene. And also a lot has to do with the curriculums, the way we teach, the pedagogy, and which is mostly the environment within the institutions. And also having, as Martha said, a female role model, changing all these narratives. That's also part of, if we want to change the education, and if we want to make it like gender transformative, that's also very important. So to change this narrative, role models, female instructors, female administrators, female principals, why can't we have? So this, creating all these environment, which enables girls to pursue whatever career they want to go, or whatever type of education and field of courses they want to pursue. So to making sure that it happens, I think that's gender transformative in true sense. And yes, talking about my organization and our programs, we had this difficulty in the beginning. I talked about the case of Lakshmi. We had this program. We wanted to provide at least, we wanted to make sure there's 50% participation of girls in the program. But it was very difficult in the beginning to find girls. There were very few applications. Even after when we put public notice advertisements, there were very few applications. There were no applicants from girls in the beginning. And that's why we had to go door to door. We had to go with, it's not that they were not girls. They were girls who were needing this kind of opportunity. But it was really difficult for them to have access to these programs and for us to reach out to them. But yes, in the beginning, we went door to door. We went to different slum areas, finding out that especially girls who were not in school, we were working as child laborers. And it was very difficult. But once we had them in our first program, first batch, and they really did well. Lakshmi was in the first group, and not only Lakshmi, all the other girls, they were better than boys in terms of retention, in terms of completion, and in terms of retention in the job even after the training. They really did well. So they have this kind of attitude. They are very sincere and serious than boys. So now, and because the effects continues, they told about these programs opportunities to other girls, and from the second year, we didn't have that much difficulty. And now, when we have this opportunity, when we open the opportunities, a lot of girls, they come to us themselves. So the past, the graduates, they really worked as role models for us.
So to stick with that challenge, and Maria, if you provide me allow me to go back to Martha for a moment. We talk about the challenges that young girls have in getting into the TVET programs and completing them. But Fawe is operating in post-conflict zones as well too. That adds another dimension. Speak a little bit about what your organization is doing and some of the challenges that women face in post-conflict areas and what you're doing about that.
Yeah, going to girls in conflict, I think that also takes us to the fact that even when we're talking about girls, when we're talking about promoting girls' education, they are not homogeneous. They have different requirements. It's just like talking about girls with disabilities. It's now talking about girls in conflict and post-conflict situation. And this is one of the critical area that, like I mentioned earlier on, we engage in a lot of research, and it is the findings of the research that informs our actions and our interventions. And one of the issues we found out was, while we are talking about those that are in school in terms of conducive learning environment and so on, but there was this category of girls that are out of school, and this was in conflict and post-conflict countries, and these were about 5 countries in Africa. These are girls that were in captive for some of them about 8 years, about 10 years. And at the time they went, they were young girls of school-going age. At the time we are getting in touch, they are now child mothers. They have children, they have 2, 3. But at the same time, they don't have any skill. They don't have any source of income. And they're already past the school-going age. Because if you dropped out in primary 2, you're coming back, those you left back in school maybe are in secondary school. So it was very difficult for them to catch up. And it was in that line that TVET was the only and the best alternative for them, giving them skills that can give them a living. And that's when we got into partnership with some of our partners. In this particular instance, it was Danida that came on first, and right now we have NORAD. But the whole issue was to put these girls, the challenge was the governments were not prepared for the girls returning, because most of them were out of the countries. But on return, there was no system, there was nothing in place for them. And so when we got into this, it was about sensitizing the parents, first of all. 2, working with the governments, because one of the challenges is, like I mentioned, this was a male-dominated field. The infrastructure that was in place was only for the men. In some of the countries like Liberia, it was very difficult to have the girls join the institutions because they didn't have facilities for the girls. But we had to engage with the governments, and eventually they had to turn some of what would have been the teachers' quarters into residence for the girls so that they're able to. The other challenge was to do with the qualification, because the institutions have certain mark at which you're able to join the institution. But these are the girls that didn't have. But again, now we had to go into policy issues. We had to engage with governments, and we had to make them appreciate where we're coming from and why these girls need support. And the governments were flexible enough. They were able to allow us, give them accelerated classes, accelerated learning. And they were able to catch up, and they were given the opportunity to join that training. So that was a challenge on its own. And one of the things we all appreciate is, if you want the girls to go into TVET and do the TVET which are male-dominated, then they must do STEM. You can't go into engineering if you have not done physics, for instance, if I can give that an example. That's another angle now that where we have to link the two. Because while you're saying go into TVET, you're going into TVET for plumbing or you're going in for electrical. It also counts back on the qualification that you have. And so we've linked the two, and we are trying to encourage more girls to join TVET so that to take the STEM subjects so that they are able to now join the TVET and do I would call it lucrative kind of courses. If you compare the girls that are doing salon and the girl that has gone into electrical, the one into electrical is at a better advantage than the one that has gone into saloning. So those are some of the things that we are doing. And there is also the issue of mismatch between the courses that they take and what the labor market demands for. And there we've tried to link the two between industry and the institution so that the girls are able to get to where they go for internship, and at the same time, the employers are able to tell institutions the demand, what is it that they need, so that it's not just churning out to graduates, but at the end of it, they don't have anything to do. So that has also been one of the challenges, and that's how we've tried to work onto it.
Thank you. You've raised something that's really important for us as well at the ILO, which is about social dialogue, which is communication between the workers and employers. I mean, governments can support, because the question is who pays for all of this training, but also the employers and the people who are going to be the talent pipeline for them need to be involved in that conversation as well too. Maria, we're going to give you the tough task here now. So we're going to ask you what TVET programs haven't been gender blind, and how have they fared in compared to those that have had a gender lens?
Well, so I have a few examples from Central America, like the Aprendo en Aprendo TVET program in Nicaragua, or Puentes in El Salvador, and Empleando Futuros in Honduras, and KES also in Kenya. So I think one of the things that was important on those programs is that they actually set a target for girls' participation. It was young women early on. So I think that was really important. And the targets were relatively ambitious. They didn't always reach the targets, but I think that's okay. I think just setting the target by itself meant that there was actually, an objective that they were reaching out more to girls. The other one was working with the industries really early on, during the labor market assessment already, to really understand what the needs were, and also to understand some of those social barriers or perception barriers that the employers had. And the targets actually could have been, also LGBT targets. So it wasn't just girls and boys. And I know one of the programs in particular also focused on making sure that LGBT youth were included in the program. The third thing was working with the community and the parents. So it wasn't just the parents, it was actually in some cases the community at a broader level, also just for the security aspects, making sure that there's a secure environment for the girls to attend those programs. Some of them had full-time gender specialists on their program. So for the duration of their program, it was a full-time gender specialist that focused on everything from beginning to end. The role models has been mentioned on several occasions. For example, in the KES program, they had a dropout mom with 3 kids that had been working in construction on and off and decided to go into a mechanics course, successfully completed it, and created a company that is now successful. And she is now really a role model. So she has come back to also encourage other dropouts that have an additional stigma, not just being a woman, but also being a dropout, that has really encouraged others to come back into these programs. And then also using different alternative communications means. So, for example, in the TVET program, they had a program about outdoor motors repairs. That was in that region a big demand. I don't know if any of us could do that, but. And they wanted to also attract girls. So what they did is they ran a radio program to promote that and to really explain what it was about, and to make also families more comfortable with girls entering into that space. So, and then last but not least, especially because it is Latin America and it is a gang dominated area, transportation was really important. So, providing safe transportation for the girls to these programs was crucial. Otherwise, the parents probably wouldn't have let them go.
I'd like to open up to the floor very quickly here, but to preface it by saying, because I want to talk about examples that you have of effective programs. EFE, they are training in the Middle East. One of their most effective programs are training young women for electricity. being electricians, because they can go into the households during the day, whereas a man would not. Very sensitive to the culture. I think very good. I was just recently in Westminster High School in Westminster, Colorado, and they have a training class, and they throw the students into these programs. And one was this young group of women who were doing autonomous robots. And they knew nothing about programming, they knew nothing about mechanics, but through the training that they provided them in the classroom, they won a statewide prize for an autonomous robot that would be used for, say, as a Mars rover. So you can do it. I think anyone can do it. It's just that you have to be, I think, focused on all the student body, not just one side. Please, if you can give me your name, your affiliation, and examples, please.
Great, and a question too.
And a question, please.
Thank you.
We love questions.
Rarely do we get a comment. Usually we're forced into questions. So now I should take the opportunity to comment, actually, but I'll do both. Mara Cronenfeld, I'm a regional director for International Youth Foundation's work in the Middle East and North Africa and specialize on workforce development. Thank you, everyone, for the good comments today. We have had some success in terms of our life skills, socio-emotional learning skills mentioned earlier, but around kind of pushing the envelope on gender issues through some of that skill building. We have 3 levels of transformation: gender sensitive, to make young people aware of gender issues in the workplace; gender responsive, to help young people understand how they might push the boundary and kind of push back and change things; and then gender transformative, which really are about changing some of the norms around how women and men operate. And these are lessons that are for both women and men and are really culturally adapted, so each person in an individual setting can decide how much of the gender transformative versus the gender sensitive they want to do. So it's meant to be very agile, depending on the setting. I'm happy to talk more about that. But my question really is a little bit maybe controversial, just to push back on you guys a little bit. Let's see. Which is that we heard this morning and now a lot about mindset and kind of an implication about culture in all of this. And certainly in the Middle East, North Africa, we hear a lot about culture. But one of your colleagues at ILO, Patrick Daru in the Middle East region, has done so much analysis on Jordan, per se. Yeah. And when he looks at Jordan, he says everyone wants to say in Jordan that it's the culture of shame. It's a culture thing which says that young women and young men are not going to go into TVET or vocational or technical jobs because it's shameful. They'd rather not work than go into these industries. This is the received wisdom. Yes, it may be true, but it's not always true. And so what he found is that really what was keeping young women and men, but primarily young women, out of the workforce and out of technical vocational jobs was compliance issues. Was that on the supply side, on the private sector side, they weren't offering healthcare, they weren't offering a legal job with a contract, they weren't offering benefits. They were supposed to have daycare for young people. They weren't. And so what Patrick found is when those organizations did offer what they were supposed to under the law, women were much more willing and able to take those jobs. They felt secure, et cetera. So one thing kind of missing from this conversation is that supply side intervention. How can the private sector get better about attracting women and frankly, abiding by some of the laws of the land? So just to push the point. And finally, I think the reason this is important to me is that sometimes we rely too much on culture, but sure. Culture's not immutable. We've all seen it change, and if we think too much about culture, we're going to reinforce these things that our culture doesn't allow this. But culture changes constantly.
Call Patrick Daru. Yeah. I know Patrick quite well. He's excellent.
Tell him I said hi.
I will do. Please.
Thanks. I was prepared with just a question only, but I'll add a kind of a success story. So. A couple of years ago, I worked for USAID, and I worked a lot on youth workforce development programs in Rwanda, where the policy environment is fairly favorable there in terms of a commitment to expand TVET within the system. But we still found in supporting NGOs to deliver both life skills and technical skills for youth and connect them to the employment sector, we still found the ecosystem lacking, right? And any mechanisms to build capacity and expand on the number of entities that could build those soft skills and kind of own the curriculum, bring the curriculum into the TVET framework, certification framework, because that got tricky in terms of if you brought someone through kind of more of a life skills or soft skills program, finding a place to have that co-accredited with the government. And so that whole system focus we heard about earlier in terms of working with the technical sector working groups and across donors and finding a place for these programs that may not be like hard technical programs, but are still really critical for these youth. And then we actually set up set up an independent youth-serving organization using the leadership, the Rwandan leadership from the NGO, from the one that was basically implemented by an typical international USAID partner. And they've been operating now for 3 years. They have funding from other foundations, and they're trying to build that like network, because there were no platforms to talk about like employment opportunities, and there was no service provider to work with NGOs in other parts, or service providers in other parts of the country, to build these, this life skills curriculum that's more participatory. So I think that blending the kind of interventions that are directed towards beneficiaries with some of these systems and things, and they don't have to be like massive, let's like restructure the entire TVET, system. So sure. I guess that I think has been a success, and I encourage people to like look at some of the work in Rwanda and other areas. So my question though for you guys is, looking at TVET in particular across a number of African countries, I think that the TVET delivery has been highly privatized historically. And there are a number of governments that are expanding on their TVET and becoming more committed in terms of their policies and channeling more students through TVET as part of like high school, for instance. But historically, the service delivery has been highly privatized. And just in what I've seen, it's made it kind of fragmented. The quality's been difficult because it's private sector delivery. It tends to be more expensive. It's a little dodgy in terms of bringing into the certification and accreditation process. And so I'm just curious, like the private sector delivery versus public sector delivery of TVET, historically, how do you think that's shaped TVET in terms of like quality and certifications and who's been in TVET and, and equity of access? And then where do you see that private-public split? Like what do you see happening in the future? And I'd be curious on a country basis, or even, the cross-country analysis that ILO might do.
It's an excellent question, and we'd love to respond. Can I take one more question from the floor, and then we'll have our experts up here respond?
Should I stand?
Your name, affiliation, and question example, whatever it is that you would like to share with us, please.
Yes, my name is Ellen. I'm here with Geneva Global, but I formerly was working with a really small grassroots nonprofit in Nepal. Our population is actually very similar to the one that Anil spoke about earlier. I don't have a success story, but I have like a hopefully soon-to-be success story. As a part of our child marriage prevention initiatives, we've started trying to plan and pilot a vocational skills building program for girls who we know are at risk of child marriage. These girls specifically are from Bihar in India, which is extremely conservative when it comes to just women's rights after marriage. So I was wondering if you guys have had any experience with TVET or vocational programming for girls that you know are likely to be married into really conservative households. So specifically, we're looking at jobs that women can do from the home, like tailoring. And I know that's kind of not the way that we've been looking at things throughout the day. We're looking at trying to send women into the labor force and change their roles. But in communities like this and working with the knowledge that this is something that will be coming within the next few years, what steps can be taken to empower them within their households to still be contributing to their household economy?
Sure. Great. I mean, I think there's lots of examples on, SMEs and maybe even leveraging technologies. I mean, obviously the platform economy offers great opportunities for women, not wholesale, but I mean, I think in certain areas it can be very important. So we've got 3 questions here. So on I don't know if who would like to start first, but maybe Martha, maybe we can go to you. There was a question about in Africa about TVET. You had mentioned Rwanda in particular, so maybe if you'd like to take that, or another question, please.
No, looking at TVET in Africa, I want to say it's both private and public, and I said this from my own study, my PhD studies on TVET and empowerment for women. And there is there's a big change. The coming in of TVET, going back into history, it was mainly by missionaries. And when it was coming in, it was targeting the men. And that's how that whole history has carried on, that it is male-dominated. And it's now breaking through, trying to say, where is the space for the women in all this? And if we look at the African Agenda 2063, all heads of governments have endorsed TVET as a key priority for Africa. If Africa is to develop, then TVET is one of the key. And because of that, a number of almost every government that has endorsed that, they have TVET institutions within each geographical, there are, I don't know how I can put it. It's like an administrative region, small, but in each there is what they call a polytechnic, which is giving services. So that has improved. But while it has improved, like you said, in terms of quality, there is still an issue that needs to be addressed, because there is providing the access bit, but then what comes out of it is not yet to the satisfaction of what is required if Africa is to develop, or if the individuals are to develop themselves. So that is what currently is the situation. There is a lot of emphasis on TVET, and governments are investing in TVET. But like I've said, we are not yet there, but we are on the road in the right direction.
Great.
Perhaps just to address the question from IYF about the companies' roles, and I think that's a really key role. I know from one of the examples in Central America, or actually in all of these examples, the government was very heavily involved and was working with the companies very directly, which I think has certainly contributed to the compliance of those companies in terms of providing the benefits. But we had heard otherwise that what some of the companies would do is, if it was like a 6 months internship, that if they kept the intern beyond the 6 months, it would be an employee. So what they would do is they would let them go 2 weeks before the 6 months were over, and take the next intern. So there's definitely a really important role on monitoring what the companies are doing, more broadly with the TVET system, but in particular also with regard to girls and women.
I just want to add something here.
Yes.
Especially you talk about the culture compliance factor. I think it's also a lot to do with the policy, because we're talking about goals and TVET, and sadly, both of them are underinvested in education. Goals as well as TVET, both are neglected. So that's very sad and unfortunate. Coming to this public and private sector, there are examples where TVET has been phenomenal. The success, the transition rate. To give you an example, even in my own organization, though we have the program is like of very small scale, more than 90% the transition rate within 3 months of graduation. And there's this institution called BTI, Boutwell Technical Institute, which is totally industry-based. A dual model, classroom-based classes, plus industry-based apprenticeship program. They have 100% transition rate. And there's another college called GATE, which is also specialized in hospitality. 100% of their graduates are employed within 3 months, immediately after what they call on-the-job training. They are offered job, immediately they complete this on-the-job training from the same employer. And there's this institute in Rwanda called Aquila. I've heard they also have close to 100% transition rate. But all of these institutes are private. Yes, because it's all about the management and then the efficiency. Public sector, the result is not very good, because again, it's because of the poor management, I think, and a lot of bureaucracies and all these procedures. So that, because of that, they are not very efficient. But if we can manage and run the programs well, there are reports and evidences that say those with TVET qualification, they have their chances of being employed is 3 times higher than those without TVET qualifications. So I really think we need to change our focus when we talk about education system.
Right. I see no one wanted to tackle the child marriage issue over there.
No, I was going to it.
You are stronger than I.
No, I was coming to her question, and I think what she's raising is pertinent in that there are some young girls that are into marriage, and they have the biological role, but at the same time, they need skills and they need income. And while we'll say there are courses like tailoring, like beauty and fashion, which can be done from home, a number of girls or women have appreciated that because they're able to raise some income and at the same time, they're able to take or manage their biological responsibilities. But while that's good and we appreciate, but we again are saying we shouldn't make the girls work, not necessarily within the home. Let it be their choice, but let it not be that's their biological role that is now forcing them to keep within the household. If one chooses that that's what I want, then we respect one's choice. But if I'm being pushed there just because that's the only alternative I have, then that's where we have an issue. But it is very, very helpful because they're able to do that and they're able to, but we are saying, can we go beyond that? How much am I earning? How much would I earn if I went out there, just like the others have gone? I think that's where the issue is. But in its own, it's a step ahead. Yeah.
Great. I'd like to do a bit of a lightning round here and then get back to the audience. So if I could start with Maria. Your work with Hilton Global, I mean, how are you addressing these issues in the private sector in terms of the gender-transformative goal? What are the things that you're doing and is there something that really surprised you in the work that you're doing?
So our work has been at the labor market assessment level. So we've been working with Youth Build and Hilton, who obviously is interested in the tourism sector and hospitality sector. And so we did a labor market assessment in Tanzania, Kenya, and South Africa. And we incorporated, again, the gender aspects early on because in some of the countries, there is already, a strong female participation in the labor market in those industries, but in others it's not. So, for example, in Tanzania, we found that women are not very much involved in these sectors, and some of it had to do with religious and cultural aspects, because when they're going into the hospitality sector, girls might have to interact with men that are not part of their family. And so that's obviously a big issue. In Kenya, on the other hand, women have already been participating in this sector, but primarily at the lower levels. So it was, in housekeeping or food and beverage and laundry. And they always felt that they couldn't rise, that all the management opportunities were given to their male peers. And there was also concerns about sexual harassment. And so the recommendations were, to work more with some local organizations that can address some of those cultural issues. And then with regard to Kenya, to integrate sexual harassment, but also even sexual trafficking training in the TVET courses, and also include more of the management courses so that the young women can actually see the opportunities, but also grasp those opportunities.
Just to say, the ILO in June at our conference, we just adopted an international convention against violence and harassment in the workplace. It has very far-reaching implications, something that would go beyond this particular conversation here, but I think this is something that can be very empowering as well, too. And it's not just optional. These things have to be put in place to give confidence to young women so that they can work away from the home without being exposed to this, because violence and harassment in the workplace does spill into the home life as well, too. Martha, I'd like to come to you speaking here about the TVET programs, the businesses. I mean, we've got an example here from Maria. Are there examples that you can give about how businesses in Africa, whether they are African-owned businesses or businesses that are coming in from Europe or the United States, are there examples there of effective training of young women? It may not be TVET, maybe it's an employer-led educational service or so.
Yeah, one of the focus is on promoting internship. And promoting internship is trying to run away from theory and going more into practical. And one of the things that has manifested is because of the poor infrastructure within the TVET training institution, most of the TVET graduates come out when they are not well equipped with skills to get employed when they get out there. So what has been happening is about placing them for internship so that they're able to get additional skills to translate the theory into the practice. And this is being done not necessarily maybe coming from far, but it also within the employers within the countries. It could be the industries, it could be the private sector, it could be the public sector. That has been one of the angles in terms of trying to see that the TVET graduates come out when they are employable, because in most cases they lack the employable skills.
Yeah, I was wondering about that earlier when we were speaking about this, that talked about some of the post-conflict areas, or the conflict areas as well too. Was it the flexibility of that training that allowed the women to sort of re-enter? Was it about the direct translation of training into a job? And that seems to be speaking to that issue, that if it is led by, say, a company, it can't just be on one technology, whether that technology is working on a particular type of machine or even just doing housekeeping work. Where is that trajectory? So do you think that these models have growth potential for women as well too, or are they basically a dead end for a particular job skill?
I would think it has the potential, because when the girls were getting into TVET, there was, before they got into the training, they had to go through an orientation, what we call an orientation process, where we had to bring experts from the field to, for instance, to enlighten them. Because many of them, if you told them about plumbing, they're not very sure where it's leading them to and whether they will get the jobs. So there was that orientation which was provided to them. And because of that, they were able to pick the courses of their own choice. But I also want to say, while they picked those courses, not all of them completed with those courses. When they got in there, they had to change. And of course, there is also a percentage that dropped off. And that was because of so many factors. So getting the courses, it had to do with the kind of orientation that they have received. It was to do with who have they seen that has done it and what has been the succession, rates. So that's how they got into the different fields. And many of them have been very successful. And it has led to even others joining the same course because they have seen what has happened. Yeah.
Anil, I want to push on the area here that we're talking about reducing self-selection by girls out of male-dominated areas as well too. So, can you speak a little bit about what that actually means and what you've seen in your analysis?
Yes, of course. There are very few girls and women who would like to go into these traditionally what we call male-dominated courses. And it's not also surprising, given the environment, given the culture, given the compliance, all these things. There are a few girls. but like we have been trying. It takes time, of course. It's not something that this change cannot take place overnight. But I see, it's been changing gradually because of the work that organizations like ours do, and the change in time, all these technological, all these media things. So especially, it's changing gradually, and I hope so. In the coming few years, it will change a lot. But yes, of course, we have a role to play there again, because for my study, when I visited these institutions, it was not surprising to see like few girls who were doing these so-called non-traditional courses, male-dominated, and there were only one or two. The first thing is because most of the girls, they are not well informed about these programs. The first thing. As I told earlier, they have never heard what geomatics engineering is, what automobile means. So, informing them and educating them, guiding them, so career guidance, I think, also plays very important role. And the other factor is also, of course, family factor, because often they have to travel, because these kind of courses, they are not available close to where they live, so they need to travel. And family again, they are okay to send their sons away for study or for career, for job, but in terms of girls, they find it very difficult. So they don't agree easily. So these factors are there, but I could see some girls who were doing automobile engineering, and that was very new in the context of Nepal. And I asked them, how was it possible for you to come? And the thing is, because most of those girls, who don't know about these programs, the parents are also not well educated. Again, that's the problem. And I saw the girls, because their family were very supportive. It's actually, one of the girls said, it was my father's dream to see me as an automobile engineer. And because our father, he was very educated, well aware. And unfortunately, that's a very rare case. A lot of girls, they wouldn't have that kind of situation. But again, so there's some good thing. Like the other girls, because she can now become the role model. And once she has started, I'm sure the others will follow later. It's just a matter of time. But when there are some who have started, initiated, and of course, and there are organizations like us, there are people who are working for this, who are trying to make changes, transform society. So, in partnership, with all our joint efforts, it will be possible. In the next 5 years, I think things will change a lot.
All right. We hope.
Yeah, we hope.
No,
not only hope, we also, we have a role, we have to act also.
Yeah, the reason I say that is because you don't know what you don't know, right? I think there are a lot of professions out there that, that a person in sub-Saharan Africa or in Southeast Asia or Latin America would be very good at, but they're just not aware of what that profession is. Does TVET allow for kind of an onboarding? Is there an interview process in there? Are there kind of is it self-selecting those or so? Because I think people need that. So I want to open it up to the audience here. You've got experts here looking at Africa, looking at Latin America, looking at South Asia. Let's challenge them. And now's your chance.
That was not part of the deal.
I cheated. Please. Sorry, my colleague will be with you in just a second. There we go.
Thank you very much. I'm Lynette from Zimbabwe. I'm a member of parliament. I just want to appreciate the programs which you are implementing, and I agree with you that it's a process. We need to be very, very patient with it. I just want to find out on your programs, we have got girls who are physically challenged. Do you have any programs for them? because I believe most of them, they can have the will to participate or to do the issues of sciences and the jobs which are not female dominated. If they choose those kind of programs, because most of them, they don't have that kind of assistance from others, do you have any programs for them so that if they take these programs, after completing the course, they will also have something to do? Thank you so much.
An excellent question. I think, persons with disabilities, if this is what we're speaking about, I mean, it's a huge problem. And I think we need to address it because this is the billion-dollar sort of answer, is that a person with disabilities can actually be very effective in the workplace. You just have to find the right area for that. So please, we have another question. Thank you, if you would.
Yes. Hi, my name is Jenny Gamble, and I'm with West Virginia University, and I'm really interested in hearing more of your thoughts around access to capital. We know that for social businesses and social entrepreneurs, particularly women, access to capital is one of the hugest barriers. And so I'm curious about kind of that retention into workforce, if access to capital for individuals who are completing TVET programs is a catalyst for business development, if you're seeing success in those areas, and to what degree might access to capital be an incentive for individuals to move into and complete TVET programs?
Right. So you're talking about access to capital to pay for the education, not necessarily to become entrepreneurs.
Both.
Okay.
Would access to capital, have you found access to capital to be helpful in completing education? But then also, because of some of the cultural norms around, who is your boss, that kind of thing, have you seen success where young women who are finishing TVET programs and have access to capital more easily enter into the workforce or establish their own businesses to employ more women?
Great. Thank you very much for that clarification. The lady with the red polka dot blouse? Now, I'll come to you in just a moment. We're spinning you in circles. if the lady here with the polka dotted blouse? Oh, I thought the red, but we'll have the black and white polka dotted blouse.
We're also polite. Hi, I'm Lauren. I'm the U.S. Director at Educate. We are working in about 1,000 schools in Uganda, Rwanda, and Kenya this year, giving soft skills, practical education to young people in high school. And a question that's been in my mind is we've heard a lot today about the impact and effectiveness of TVET and other educational interventions. We've heard a lot about the data for evidence. And I haven't heard a lot about cost. And so I'm curious if you all see, when you're reviewing programs and their impact, if you're getting cost data, comparative cost data, especially as it impacts girls, because we know their returns to success are so high. It's helpful to compare to cost, but we have trouble comparing our program to other programs because that data isn't usually available.
Fantastic. So we'll go for the other polka dotted blouse, and then we'll come to the back of the room over there, and then we'll respond.
Hi, Emily Morris, American University, and I'm also a researcher and evaluator on longitudinal programs of livelihoods and work skills. And one of the things we have found with TVET is that young people are often trained in one area, so welding or carpentry or tailoring, but what we actually find is that young people practice mixed and multiple livelihoods in order to engage with the market, deal with fluctuations, maternity, crises, other things. What are your experiences in the trainings of TVET, and are they using a more European and US model of one trade area, or are we training in mixed and multiple livelihoods?
Great. And for the colleague in the back?
Hi, my name is Michelle Flo, and I'm from the Aberson Foundation. We fund a lot of programs in sub-Saharan Africa, specifically Uganda, so children or girls' education from primary years all the way to college. And one of the challenges that I've seen in our funding is more on impact. A lot of our girls learn, and then they don't have jobs to go to. We get a lot of requests from I guess it was called polytechnical universities. And we have tried putting capital at the end of the education, so because that's my background. So, and that didn't work either. It worked for few, but less than what we expected. So I'm curious to hear, because I'm relatively new in this field, what has worked in terms of incentives what point in the supply chain or the process of a girl's education are incentives effective? And how do we educate the families, most of which are vulnerable women to begin with, to encourage their children to reach for the stars?
Great. I think we'll stop there. We have 5 good questions on girls with disabilities, access to capital, both for training and startup, soft skills, the cost of data. We've looked at tailored education. Is it one area or is it a range of areas? And then our last question here. So please, to the panel, let us know what question you want to answer so we can do the best we can.
Let me come to your question about the disability. Unfortunately, we don't have any specific program for the disability, but we do have some people with disabilities in our program. It's all again, we have enrolled them. If their disability does not affect the trainability, the trainability factor, if they can come attend, we have encouraged them, and of course some of them have done very well, and also have the transition into employment. We have helped with that, and they're doing great. They're working. Very few cases, but of course there's a need, and there's some organization, not necessarily working in TVET, but other organizations more specialized in working with and providing opportunities to disabilities. But yes, for us, we have few of them, and yes, we have success stories. They have succeeded. And
can I just add to
sure,
that one?
Sure,
just because we actually have a grantee in Nepal that works with disabled women and trains them, and so I can tell you a little bit more. It's not a TVET system, but it focuses particularly on that.
Yeah, and then I just want to come about this issue of training. Specific training in one field of area. For example, you were talking about welding. What we have tried to do to address that issue is also providing opportunities for cross training, both when they are in the training and even when they are in job later. We try because our training programs, especially our programs are for those who are not in school. So the length of program is something between 6 months to 1 year, and we provide foundation for example, in hospitality sector. So we allow them to try all the different courses that we have for the first 2 months, housekeeping, service, and safe. And it's after 2 months they decide where to go. So that foundation, the skill, they learn something within that 2 months. So that also helps. It makes them quite flexible. Where there is opportunity for service, they can approach that, and if there's opportunity for housekeeping, so it helps. And then also we are working with the industry, the hotel group, which are financing us, and where most of our graduates work. After a 1 year or 2 year, if they are interested to go for cross training, then we are working. They also allow the hotel internally to have this cross training, so that in future they can also jump to another field.
Perhaps also to add to that one is, I think that's why it's also really important to have the soft skills training included in the TVET program, because sometimes employers are actually happy to do the on-the-job training, but it's the soft skills that many employers say that the youth are lacking. And so including that in the TVET program, I think by itself also provides additional opportunities for youth to then enter into other job opportunities.
Right, I agree. And together with the soft skill, entrepreneurship skill also I think becomes very important, because TVET is not just about finding employment. It also opens the door for self-employment. So entrepreneurship skill, soft skill, IT skills really help them in that.
Maybe if I could respond to the one of access to capital. I want to agree with you that capital it's a challenge. And one thing is that TVET training is costly. And it's costly because of the kind of equipment that is used. But it also now depends with the course that you're going to do. If one does hairdressing, the cost will not be as high as the one that would do engineering or plumbing or electrical. Because for some of those courses, you have to buy the equipment by yourself. And for those that have been sponsored by civil society, those are some of the costs that are factored within the package that is given in terms of what is required, in terms of the tools that one needs. But for those that go in as self-sponsorship, it becomes very challenging, and that's why a number of them drop out and they don't complete the cycle. The other angle of capital in terms of, like, if one wants to be self-employed, it is also another challenge. If that capital is not provided, even if the graduates have the potential to start their own business, it becomes a very big challenge. And that has also been incorporated into the package for the scholars. But the challenge is the sustainability, because as civil society, you come in today, do something 3 years, it ends. Then what happens? And that's why, as FAWE, we work very, very closely with the government, because what we do is what we call demonstrative intervention. It's not like we are to take over the responsibility of government, but we try to show government that if you want this to succeed, then this is the way to go. And like I mentioned earlier, it's one of the issues that the African Union has picked up. And it is one of the issues that needs to be considered, because we have challenged governments that you have open polytechnics all over the place. But then what happens? Trying to link it to employability, because, well, you can give me skills, but if I don't make use of those skills, then it may not create a very big difference. And those are some of the things that we are working on as civil society organizations, holding governments accountable, putting them at task, conducting studies, and trying to make recommendations to them in terms of, if we want to make this training meaningful and useful, then this is what needs to be done. And capital, startup capital, that's what we are calling it, is one of the issues that we are working on. Yeah.
You know, just from the ILO perspective, you know, this is a massive problem. I mean, we need to find gainful employment for people, right? I mean, we have populations that are growing. You know, a good job is the best way out of poverty. I mean, there's a reason that decent work is goal 8 in the SDGs. A good job will help you avoid poverty, avoid hunger, will provide better education. It will actually contribute towards women's empowerment and gender equality. It will work towards environmental sustainability as well, too. So job creation is extraordinarily important. We have a lot of mitigating factors, right? The quality of education, the quality of those jobs, the informality in many countries as well, too, where people are not protected, the lack of protection for people in the workplace, the lack of qualified labor inspectorates who could root out problems in global supply chains. But there are a number of responses. I think we're seeing here examples about, from the ground up, how we're building those systems. But it doesn't require little interventions here and there. It requires a holistic response where the government has to have the political will to make that happen. They are the only ones who can actually afford to put this in place. We have at the ILO something called Social Protection Floor. We came up with a convention and a recommendation, and right now Social Protection Floor is everything from, in the States you would see it as WIC or SNAP, you know, nutritional assistance. This is an economic stabilizer. It helps create a floor so people don't fall below the poverty line, because any money or food that's given to people goes right back into the economy itself. So these are not costs. These are actually investments in people, investment in the populace. That needs to be done. On disabilities, the ILO has a global disability network. Yes, it only operates in some parts of Asia and Europe, but there is some examples of how that works. The idea here about, for example, I was just interviewing a gentleman out in the Midwest who is blind. And he says, I can listen at 4 times the rate of somebody who is sighted. That person has a comparative advantage. I was meeting up with someone who has been deaf since birth. This person is a software enterprise engineer. I mean, this person is focused on his work. And in his part-time, he writes different applications to help his business be more effective. There are many ways in which those who are differently abled can actually contribute to society. Right? In terms of access to capital, I mean, the ILO likes to work on programs that train people in entrepreneurship, start and improve your business. I'll go back a few years out of the Banda Aceh and the tsunami had struck. A lot of people lost everything, right? It came in, it destroyed the entire environment. We were training young women on how to do market analysis, how to apply for a loan, what it meant to start a business. I mean, we think of that as something that's very simple, but these are things that people need to know, how to access the capital itself. There are associations, business associations, there are workers' organizations through trade unions or workers' associations. So there's a lot of things that can be done. And quite honestly, in terms of the global supply chain, we find that women-run businesses that integrate into global value chains actually adds greater value at the domestic level. So that's what we need to encourage as well too, and bring more women entrepreneurs online, but providing them with the capital, because I think at the end of the day, it's about who pays for the training. It cannot always be on the shoulders of the individual. That has to be shared fairly. And companies that are going in, they are benefiting from a talented pipeline or that talent pipeline. They should also be able to contribute to that as well too. I'll take a few more questions from the floor. To those maybe who haven't spoken yet, the gentleman here.
Hi, my name is Michael Ellis. I'm an intern in Congressman Kine's office. I was curious, you mentioned access to capital. Do you guys have a number roughly on, like, let's say someone was just going to give you guys money, like, how much do you need? Great, here's how much money you can have. What does that number sort of look like, or what are the estimates on that number?
Okay, can you reframe that slightly? I mean, access to capital for what? I mean, if somebody is coming to start their education, someone is to start business, somebody who is... has an existing business, wants to increase. I'm sorry.
Let's say, we have all these institutions, and then there's an underserved population.
Yeah.
If you're going to, everyone who wanted this sort of training and could do this sort of training, if you're going to train all of them,
right?
How much money would you need?
Okay. Good. We'll provide you with some written documentation very shortly on that, as long as you're writing legislation. The young lady behind the gentleman there, please. Yeah.
I have a question in terms of just if you've come across this at all. I've become quite fascinated with the role of trauma for this population and how it affects their ability to perform well, their ability to pass courses and to get jobs, to keep jobs. We found it ourselves. I'm Andrea Pizziconi. I'm the founder of Africa Integras, and we've just launched a new initiative that actually started a year ago here at Brookings. The idea came called Girls First Finance, and one of the things we found is that most of these young women are traumatized from abuse, and not addressing that means the access to capital is irrelevant. The studies show that if you give them skills, but if you don't heal the underlying traumas, then the PTSD still. Has anybody seen this treated, and has anybody seen a TVET that focuses on training mental health at a technical level, kind of social workers, very low level 3-month courses? That's my question.
Right, thank you. The gentleman in the front here, please.
Hi, my name is Bolaji, Making Sense International. My question is around the thought process that organizations put behind when selecting individuals or locations to implement projects like this. What are the thought process? Because there's a general saying that talents are everywhere, but opportunity is not. So what I see sometimes is that organizations are particularly focused in a particular region, a particular location, whereas sometimes these opportunities could be created in locations that might even drive the kind of change we want to see. So, for example, instead of really implementing projects or programs in location A or B, what thought processes are organizations really putting in implementing programs in location maybe C?
Okay. Could we take 2 more questions? The young lady here in the shawl, and then the lady in the back.
Hi, I'm Allison Nafziger from MEDA. I had 2 questions. The first, one of you mentioned having targets for young women in your TVET programs, but also LGBTQ plus populations. And I was wondering how you targeted that population without exposing them to danger. Most of the work that I do is in East Africa, where we wouldn't be able to openly target. And then my second question is, we've been talking a lot about adapting programs to be more women-friendly, girl-friendly, specifically around times or childcare. And I'm just curious if you have examples or ideas of programs that are educating boys and men to be more involved in reproductive roles and household work so that they're sharing the responsibility with women as opposed to just adapting things so that women can do both.
Excellent. And in the back, please. I don't know if it's on.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
So I'm Desmond Kennedy, and I'm from Jamaica. My context is somewhat different as it relates to TVET. While we have a massive TVET sector, one of the issues that we contend with is the level of stigmatization as to who goes into tech work. The gender issue is not there, but we tend to find persons who are, in quote-unquote, more able tend to go into other sectors like medicine and so forth. And maybe those that we tend to classify as less able tend to go into certain levels of tech work. I don't know if this is an international practice, and maybe somebody has some sort of solution as to how we can address this.
Great. So I'll open it back up to the panel. If you would, please be kind to respond to what question we may have on the table now. Maria?
Sure. Well, perhaps
Ladies
I
first.
might address one of the questions we didn't answer before about the cost issues. So it's true that I think for almost all education programs, there isn't much cost information available. I think JPAL is one of the few organizations that actually has sometimes retroactively collected some of the cost information. But this is changing. USAID actually is now requiring of all of its education programs the cost data will be provided. So in a kind of consistent way. So hopefully in 4 or 5 years, we will actually be in a different place from where we are now, but it's definitely still a challenge now. One of the other questions was about LGBTQ youth. I can't talk to the details. I don't know the program in that much detail, but I'll be happy to put you in touch with them. It wasn't necessarily that they set a target for recruiting them, but I think what it was is being really open, and actually as they were doing the interview process of who was applying, to really be open and inviting them in, and then actually addressing them throughout the program. So it was that welcoming and that openness, and having that declared at least internal openness, that's what they were also trying to incorporate into the program. But I'll be happy to follow up more.
Maybe if I can just touch on the support, particularly to those that are traumatized. That's why of recent, it has been realized that it's very important to come up with a comprehensive support. If you're giving support, for instance, if you're putting girls or boys in the TVET, it's not about tuition. Mm-hmm. It goes beyond tuition. And that's why there is psychosocial support, particularly for the girls that had dropped out, like I was talking about conflict. You can't just give them tuition and that they will not complete. So there is that support that goes on through. There is the psychosocial, and then there's the mentorship. Those are a must within the whole entire training. And in some of the cases, we even go ahead to attach specific support to specific individuals. Because again, they also have different experiences. and they will need that kind of, so it is that comprehensiveness, but not only focusing on giving them tuition. You give them tuition, you forget about the others, then there will still be a big challenge to that. Yeah.
I want to come to your question about the cost. Yes, I can give example from my program. So we started this program in 2013, the hospitality training program. And yes, of course, as Martha said, vocational education is relatively expensive than general education. I heard like the cost for one, to train one, will support around 3 children and 3 people for general education. So in my case, it's like, as I said earlier, 6 months up to 1 year of training program. And because we are like hospitality, and we have 3, so far we have 3 different occupational courses, housekeeping, safe and service. And then we need around $1,000 to train one, and also to ensure their placement after the training. And the second one, again, about this trauma issue, we haven't had this kind of program, but I have observed, and it was not very successful, the training program, the vocational training program, TVET. And what we learned is, because first you need to rehabilitate them, the training, and then rehabilitation cannot go side by side, because there is this trainability factor, learnability. Of course, those who are in trauma, because they have other different needs. So that does not, we found, does not go very along very well. And the last question about working with men and boys. Yes, of course, we need to work with men and boys, directly, indirectly, formally, informally. After all, because the major decision maker in the family, in the community are men. So I gave the example of Lakshmi. In that case, we had to work together with her father especially. We took her to show the programs. And oftentimes you need to communicate with them, persuade them, convince them. If you are not able, then you need like some third party. It could be like a teacher, and usually the teachers are male, or the community leader. Yes. So yes, directly, indirectly, in different ways, we work together with boys and men. Otherwise, it won't be possible.
Good. Well, these have been fascinating discussions. I think we probably could go on even further. I just want to make 2 quick comments to say that the cost of investing in people is only a fraction of the loss in economic growth and productivity. And we certainly can provide details from our point of view. Also, we don't need to fix women. We just need to fix the perception of men and boys of women and their role in society today. And that is about responsibilities and everything from care on down the line to opportunities. I'm really privileged to be here with Anil, with Maria and Mata. My email is cassidy@ilo.org. I'm happy to connect you with our experts around the field, around the world. So anything you have in addition, please let us know. And of course, the colleagues here are available if you wish to speak to them subsequent to this. Thank you very much, everyone. Greatly appreciate you being here.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos from Brookings.